Yo, Lloyd, aka MegaBlitzz. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the decks that you should play for the 2024 World Championships. So I have a tier list here, and I'm going to be talking about each one of these decks and how I feel that they are kind of placed going into the 2024 Pokemon World Championships. But first, I have to give a huge shout out to Little Dark Fury for actually providing this tier list for everybody to use. So I would definitely love to see everyone else's opinion. So definitely join the Discord and then make this tier list up and just post it in the MegaBlitzz Cave Discord. I would love to see all of your guys' opinions. So starting us off here with our first deck being kind of Dungeons and Dragons or like Moon Dune or just like basically like the baby Roaring Moons with like maybe one or two Roaring Moon EX. I'm going to put this in tier 2. I don't think the deck's bad by any means. I think it's a pretty okay deck. It's kind of maybe not rogue, almost quite rogue. The thing the deck has going for it, it has a huge one-hit KO potential. However, the downside with the deck is that it doesn't have the speed that it once had with like Galarian Moltres V and things like that when those cards were in the format. So for that reason, I do have to put this down here in tier 2. I just don't think it's a great deck to play for the World Championships. I think we might see like maybe 1 or maybe 2 make day 2, but anything past that, not so much. Ancient Box. Now, I have a love-hate relationship with Ancient Box. I love to play the deck. The deck is really good. I'm just not the greatest at playing the deck, but it is, I believe, at tier 1.5. I think Ancient Box is a very solid choice for the World Championships. If you've been playing Ancient Box pretty consistently throughout the season, I feel like just sticking with Ancient Box is not a bad idea, genuinely. You take some pretty decent matchups into things like Gardevoir and Chen Pao and a couple other decks, but you really have a tough time into things like Charizard and Snorlax Stall. And Charizard is projected to be one of the most played decks going into this World Championships, and like Regidrogo V-Star and Gardevoir as well. So you have some decent matchups into some of those, but Charizard is really a difficult thing for this deck to overcome. And a lot of people are playing the Walking Wake over Koraidon. Personally, I like the Koraidon. I like the Primordial Beatdown early game, but the Walking Wake is also fine. We have Arc Armarouge. Unfortunately, I had to put this in Rogue/Bad. Not really any of the Arc variants are good. We're going to kind of talk about each one of them individually, but I'm unfortunately going to have to put all of them down here in the Rogue/Bad. I do think that Arc Hand Control is probably the best Arceus variant to play. Arc Armarouge just doesn't have the speed or kind of the power that it needs to really keep up in the format with things like Dragapult Charizard and like just the new Charizard variant coming out and Lugia and Raging Bolt Ogerpon and Regidrogo. I don't think Arc Armarouge has that ability to keep up. And the same thing goes for Arctina. You have a really hard time getting in to the Gardevoir matchup. You have a really hard time into the Lugia matchup. It's really fair for Lugia. It's also really hard to beat Charizard as well, unless you're playing that maximum belt. And even then, it's still kind of messy a little bit to get there, unfortunately. But as far as Arc Hand Control goes with like the Cornerstone Mask Ogerpon and things like that, I think that's probably the best Arceus variant to play, just because Hand Disruption is really good in this format. So you're playing like 4 Judge, 4 Iono, you're playing Unfair Stamp, you're disrupting your opponent with things like Eerie and Grabber and things of that nature. So for that reason, I do have to put Arc Hand Control kind of at the top of Rogue/Bad, but nothing more than that. Charizard Bib, it's like bad. If you're going to play Charizard, just play Pidgeot Charizard. Don't play Bibzard. Bibzard is just not good. Chien-Pao Excalibur. Now, I think Chien-Pao Excalibur has fallen off significantly since its kind of big reign at like the Indianapolis regionals and things like that. But I still have to put it in tier 1.5. It has great one-hit KO potential into the Charizard matchup. It has great time into kind of like some of the single prize decks being like Lost Box and things like that. However, I don't really know how its Raging Bolt Ogerpon matchup quite feels. It's kind of just two big one-hit KO decks going at it. And I feel like Raging Bolt Ogerpon just gets there faster than Chien-Pao might. So for that reason, I do have to put Chien-Pao in tier 1.5. I think it's kind of like Ancient Box or Chien-Pao are kind of back and forth. I'm not too sure which one to put at the top of tier 1.5 here. We're going to put Dialga in tier 2. I think Dialga has significantly fallen since its big win at the Indianapolis Regionals by Andrew Hedrick, and it doesn't really get any new love with this Shrouded Fable set going into the World Championships. Sure, you had the Star Chronos and kind of like the take an extra turn and things like that, but other than that, you have nothing else going for you, really. So for that reason, I had to put that in tier 2. Then we have Dragapult Xatu. I think this deck's also tier 2. Dragapult Xatu isn't bad by any means. I just feel like it's not the best Dragapult variant you could be playing. And with that being said, I believe there's also a Lost Zone Dragapult, which I also have to put in Rogue/Bad. I think Lost Zone Dragapult is the clunkiest thing I've seen in a very long time. As someone who has played quite a bit of Lost Box decks between Lost Tina, Lost Sablezard, Lost Goodra, like Lost Paradox, Lost Zone Dragapult is... just don't play the deck. Don't play the deck. Please do not play Lost Zone Dragapult. Talking about some other Lost Box variants here. We do have Lost Sablezard. I'm going to put Lost Sablezard in tier 2. I think if you've been playing Lost Sablezard pretty regularly, then it makes sense to play Lost Sablezard. If in the right hands, Lost Sablezard can go really far in this tournament, but it should not be your first pick. I do think it's kind of like top of tier 2, though, in the right hands. If it's someone like you're like, oh, I'm going to play Lost Sablezard because I've been playing it for 2 weeks and I've been testing, just don't play it. If you've been playing it for like 3, 4, 5 months, Lost Sablezard makes sense. Lost Giratina, also going to have to put this in tier 2 here. Kind of in the middle, I feel like. Maybe a little bit above Roaring Moon. Lost Tina is not a bad deck by any means. It kind of had a big, not big, but a resurgence a little bit on the online scene. Maybe about 1 or 2 weeks ago. However, it didn't really stay, and Lost Tina is never the deck it was after after Path to the Peak rotated. The deck doesn't really have that nice comeback potential like it used to. Being able to Roxanne, like Path Roxanne your opponent, was incredible, especially when you're playing against things like Charizard or a bunch of these other decks that have rule boxes. That Path to the Peak really made the deck, hence why the deck played 4 of them. But since Path rotated, Lost Tina kind of just fell off to the side a little bit. So, Lost Tina, not a bad pick, not a great pick. I'm not going to be shocked to see any of these like tier 2 decks, maybe 1 or 2 of them make day 2. And I'll kind of talk about how I feel each section is going to be going into the World Championships, like where I think all the tier 1.5 decks should be, all the tier 2 decks, and things like that. Goldango. I think Goldango's also like a tier 2 deck, maybe tier 1.5. I think it's below the Lost Box variants, unfortunately. And the reason I say that is it gains pretty much nothing from the new set. Goldango is one of those decks where if you've been playing it and you know the lines, then great, you can play it. However, once again, the problem I feel with Goldango is it's just a like worse Chen Pao or Raging Bolt Ogerpon, just because like Raging Bolt Ogerpon lets you draw cards, it lets you hit big numbers. Chen Pao lets you just hit huge numbers bigger than Goldango does, and the downside of Goldango is like you have to evolve into it, so it kind of feels like you almost have to play like TM Evo or Hyper Aroma to find those Goldangos to be able to evolve your Gimme Ghouls. So Goldango in tier 2 for that reason here. This like Ogerpon Dusclops deck is Rogue/Bad, don't play it. The Okidogi deck is also bad, don't play that. Get kind of some of these out of the way here. United Wings is also kind of a meme. Don't play United Wings to the World Championships. I think someone's going to, and someone's going to do good with it, and they're going to make day 2, and everyone's going to be like, oh my gosh, United Wings make day 2 at Worlds. Someone's going to do it. It's fine, but it gets some love with like the Dart Tricks and stuff coming out, but I just don't feel like it's enough to push the deck further. You still have a hard time into Gardevoir. You have a hard time into Charizard. You absolutely smoke Lugia, however. But other than that, you have nothing else really going for you. So, Gouging Fire, I'm going to put at like the bottom of tier 2. It's a pretty okay deck. I just feel like if you want a turbo deck, a fast aggro deck, Gouging Fire is not going to be that deck. We have like the Lost Zone Sableye Dusclops deck where you're trying to like blow up a bunch of Dusclops, Lost Mine, put a bunch of damage counters everywhere, get yourself to like 3, Roxanne your opponent, or unfair stamp them or something. The deck is really good once it sets up. If you can set up the board and you can get everything exactly when you need it, I think the deck is phenomenal. However, it's really hard to get the deck set up, and it feels like it's almost less consistent than Lugia, which is crazy to say because Lugia is known for being that really inconsistent deck, unfortunately. So for that reason, I have to put it in tier 2, just because you're trying to like evolve into the Dusclops, you're trying to Lost Mine and get like 10 in the Lost Zone with like Vacuums and Colruses and things like that. So for that reason, I have to put it in tier 2. A couple other decks that I do want to kind of talk about really quickly. Future Box, I'm also going to put in tier 2. Future Hands, Future Box are kind of both in the same kind of spot, really. They're not a bad deck if you can hit the right matchups. If you're playing Future Hands and you hit a bunch of Lugias or a bunch of like Gardevoir and stuff, you're going to have a great time. However, the moment you hit like Charizard and you are playing like Future Hands, forget it. You're probably not winning that game. Or like Stall even kind of gets a little awkward, I feel like, in that matchup as well. So for that reason, I have to put it in tier 2. I did forget a Lost Box variant, so I do feel kind of bad, but it does go in tier 1.5. I think Lost Paradox or like Lost, just like Turbo Lost Box or Lost like Roaring Moon with Iron Hands and the Iron Thorns and stuff like that, I think is probably the best Lost Box variant you can play. However, the problem is Kyurem also comes out in this Shrouded Fable set, and that will be legal for the World Championships, and I feel like that does pose a threat to some of the Lost Box decks, with Regidrogo being so just dominant in our format right now. I feel like that really hinders the Lost Box variants, but if you are going to decide to play Lost Box to the World Championships, probably play this version, probably the best version of Lost Box you can play right now. So I definitely would play that for sure. We have like Pidgeot Control. I think Pidgeot Control is like tier 2, but if you put it in, you know, like someone who's been playing Control for so long, like Sandra Wedrick or, you know, Blitzel or somebody like that, then there's going to be like tier 1, tier 1.5. But for the average player, I got to put it down here in like tier 2. Control is just a really hard deck to play. It's hard to win the games. And with ties being effectively a loss in this World Championship with the different tournament structure, I feel like Control is not a safe pick unless you are very good at playing Control and being able to finish the games very quickly and being able to know when to scoop, what your lines are, exactly when to make them, and things of that nature. So for that reason, I had to put Control down here in tier 2 just because of that tournament structure. If the tournament structure was a little bit different and ties weren't effectively a loss and didn't hurt as much in this championship, I would put it in tier 1.5. But I had to put it in tier 2 because of that tournament structure here. Snorlax Stall. Now, this is going to be the first deck I'm going to put in tier 1. I believe Snorlax Stall is probably one of the best decks you can play going into the World Championships. You have a great time into Charizard. You have a good time into a bunch of other matchups, things like Raging Boat Ogerpon a little bit. You have a pretty solid matchup into things like Gardevoir, Dragapult variants, and honestly, like Regidrogo isn't really that bad either. The problem with Stall is sometimes you just can't quite get there, and the hard part also is like Kyurem comes out in this set, so if your opponent does end up playing like Colress's Tenacity or Colress's Experiment or something like that, and they end up Regidrogoing, or like copy Regidrogo, hit with Kyurem, you're losing 3 Snorlaxes, and that feels kind of bad over time, but it still takes a great matchup into a lot of things. I made an entire video about Snorlax Stall and how I feel about the deck going into the World Championships. So I definitely recommend checking that video out for sure. I feel like Snorlax Stall is a very solid pick, especially if you've been playing a lot of Stall or if you're really just itching for that Control deck to play. I feel like Quad Stall is just the way to go. You play like Quad Stall, like 2 Mimikyus, you know, like Cornerstone Mask Ogerpon, maybe like a Chi-Yu, and Pidgeot V, Rotom V, and that's the deck. And then you just fill it with a bunch of other stuff. The deck gets really good with some of the new cards from Shrouded Fable. The biggest one coming to my mind is Xerxix. I believe it's like Xerxix Connections or something like that. That card being able to make your opponent discard down to 3 cards in their hand, I feel like is absolutely incredible. So for that reason, I have to put it in tier 1. Quad Thorns. Now, I've been playing quite a bit of Quad Thorns the last couple days, and I really have been enjoying my time playing Quad Thorns. However, the deck has one problem. It plays 4 basics, and that's about it. So if you can't find your way into another basic, or like you prize 2 of your 4 Iron Thorns, the deck gets really hard to play. So for that reason, I got to put it in tier 1.5. I think the deck is good. If you go to the World Championships and you play against 4 Lugias and you're on Quad Thorns, you're having a great time. But the moment you hit like Regidrogo or you hit like Raging Bolt Ogerpon, not so much, because Raging Bolt Ogerpon can get there just by playing energy retrievals and Professor Zeta's Vitality and then just kind of manually attaching for turn or using that Zeta's Vitality and then to be able to just discard 4 energy, KO a Thorns, and like they don't really need the Teal Dance to win the game or to get there. So for that reason, I do have to put it in tier 1.5. I think someone is going to play Quad Thorns. I think quite a bit of people are actually going to play Quad Thorns, and they're going to do pretty well with it. And I think it is going to be more popular than people give it credit for. Miraidon, I got to put this in like tier 2 somewhere. We'll put it kind of behind Goldengo. Everybody's talking about Miraidon, how it's going to make a comeback and stuff. I'm not a believer. I've never been a huge Miraidon fan to begin with. I think Miraidon had its time after last World Championships with Andrew Mahone, and then it kind of got really cooked up after that. Won a couple regionals and stuff. It was really popular for a couple like regionals, maybe like 3, 4, 5 months. But since losing Flaffy and a couple other things, the deck's really kind of just fallen since then. So tier 2 is about the best I can give this deck, unfortunately. Dragapult Pidgeot. I'm going to put in tier 1.5. I think Dragapult Pidgeot is very underrated. I think Dragapult Pidgeot is probably the best Dragapult variant you can play if you're not adding things like Charizard and stuff. I think Dragapult Pidgeot is a very solid deck. It's very consistent. You're able to do a lot of cool things with this deck, but I cannot put it any more than the bottom of tier 1.5, like top of tier 2. If there was like a tier 1.75, that's where Dragapult Pidgeot goes, but I'm going to put it at the bottom of tier 1.5 because I think Dragapult is very well positioned going into the World Championships. Charizard Pidgeot. Now, Charizard Pidgeot and Charizard Dragapult are very similar, so this is going to be just straight Charizard Pidgeot here, and then this is going to be like Charizard Pidgeot with like tech with Dragapult. I think Charizard Pidgeot is tier 1. I think Charizard Pidgeot plus Dragapult is S tier. I think Charizard Dragapult is probably like Charizard Dragapult plus Pidgeot, maybe like a tech for Dusknoir if you really want. Don't even really need the Dusknoir. I think is one of the best decks you can play in the format right now, mostly because I can't. I have to put it in a tier up tier 1. I can't put it in S tier only because the deck does have some consistency issues I've noticed. So for that reason, I have to put it down in tier 1, not S tier. I apologize. Top of tier 1, I think the deck is very good. I think the deck is very powerful when you can get there. Being able to Infernal Rain, get that fire energy attached to the Dragapult is very incredible and something awesome that you can do with the deck. But Charizard Pidgeot is just more consistent, but you don't have that extra Dragapult line that you get with Charizard Pidgeot Dragapult, because Charizard Pidgeot is just Pidgeot and Charizard. And you don't get to add that extra 200 play 6 damage counters, especially if you're playing against something like Chien-Pao, where you can go, okay, boss up like Baxcalibur, smack for 200, play 6 damage counters on maybe a Bidoof and take a KO on that, or maybe 6 damage counters on a Barrel, and then the following turn you'd Phantom Dive again, putting 6 damage counters on the Barrel, take a KO on that. So there's extra stuff that you can do with the Dragapult variant that you can't do without it. So for that reason, I have to put it in tier 1, at the top of tier 1, and I think Charizard Pidgeot is probably like right next to it, maybe a little bit below stall. So those where the Charizard variants are gonna be. Lugia V-Star. I'm gonna put this deck in tier 1. I think Lugia V-Star is one of the better decks you can play to the World Championships because it's a best of 3 format. I think Lugia in a best of 1 format is probably one of the worst decks you can play. It's too inconsistent. You can't really rely on it all that often. I've gotten burnt on it a lot, and I'm a very avid Lugia enjoyer. It's the channel's mascot. I've played Single Strike Lugia, Colorless Lugia, Rats Lugia. I've played Rainbow Lugia. I've played every Lugia variant that has ever been around, and I really enjoy playing Lugia. But this variant is probably the most inconsistent Lugia deck that I think I've ever played. And for that reason, that's why it's in tier 1. However, if you can get the deck set up, if you can get 2 Chops on discard pile, get 1 Rat evolved, and maybe depending on the matchup, getting able to put 4 energies onto an Iron Hands with Legacy Energy and start amping for extra prizes, you are going to roll over everything in the entire room. If you can perfectly, every time, turn 2 setup, double Chops, evolve a Rat, Lugia V-Star, and attack something big. That is the best deck in the room if you can do that every time. However, you can't, and that's the problem that Lugia runs into, is its worst enemy is itself. Gardevoir EX. I feel like Gardevoir EX is at the very tippy top of tier 1. I think Gardevoir EX is a very solid and good choice for the World Championships. If you've been playing Gardevoir pretty consistently since Monkey Dory and all that stuff has come out, just roll with it. Gardevoir is a very solid deck. I think a lot of the more top players, people like Tord Reklev, Azul, and things like that, might gravitate more towards Gardevoir because there's so many lines you can make with the deck and so much damage manipulation that can really help you throughout the game to win the game overall. And like I said, in the right hands, Gardevoir is the best deck in the room. However, the problem Gardevoir has is it feels like you almost have to have TM Evo to be able to get into your Kirlias or play Hyper Roma. But if you play Hyper Roma, then you don't get to play Unfair Stamp, which also feels bad. So the problem that Gardevoir has is it's really difficult to find your way into those Kirlias because we don't have Level Ball anymore. But Gardevoir is still a really incredible pick for the World Championships overall. Now, Raging Bolt Ogerpon, I saved this for basically next to last because I think Raging Bolt Ogerpon is actually pretty well positioned going into the World Championships. So I'm actually going to put this right above the Pidgeot Charizard variant because I think Raging Bolt Ogerpon has that kind of I'm fast, I'm aggressive. If I get there, and I win. If I can just blow up something and take prize cards my first turn attacking, I'm in a very good position. However, if you end up becoming short on that KO on your first turn attacking, your win percentage kind of drops dramatically, I feel like. So, Raging Bolt Ogerpon, probably the best just beat stick deck you can get, and I think it has a lot of cool lines you can do. You can kind of finish the game off with a Teal Mask Ogerpon into some of the Charizard variants, and it's kind of also nice too, especially with things like Snorlax Stall, where you can basically just put Teal Mask Ogerpon and a Raging Bolt in play, maybe not even a Raging Bolt, just Teal Mask Ogerpon and just kind of put energy onto it and Myriad Leaf Shower over and over and over again. And that's kind of how you end up winning the game, it feels like most of the time. I feel like Raging Bolt Ogerpon is a very solid deck. It's very nice for the best of 3 format because let's say you win game 1 and then game 2, you kind of just are falling really behind. You can just scoop it up real quick and have plenty of time to finish that game 3 because the deck is so fast and aggressive. Now, Regidragobox is probably going to be the best deck to play, I feel like, to the 2024 World Championships. Regidragobox with that Ogerpon being able to draw cards, it feels like the Mewtwo and Mew Tag Team GX with that perfection ability, being able to just pick Pokemon from your discard pile and then use that attack. This deck feels just like that, and honestly, I've really been enjoying Regidragobox. I'm super pumped to be able to get my hands on the rest of the Regidrago V-Stars that I need so I can really start playing this deck in person as opposed to just playing it online. I've made a video about Regidrago V-Star and how I feel like it is the best deck to play to the 2024 World Championship, so definitely recommend checking that video out. And while you're checking that video out, do not forget to leave a like, smash that subscribe button. I really would appreciate it. And also, drop a comment down below. Let me know what deck you feel like is going to win the 2024 World Championships. I feel like it's going to be Regidrago V-Star. It has such great matchups. It's pretty consistent. You have so much utility at your disposal. The new Kiram card comes out, so you start putting Lost Box decks into check as well. And the deck just has so many cool lines it can make. Being able to use your Prime Catcher, Legacy Star, grab 2 things out of your discard pile, using Prime Catcher a second time is just too good, I feel like. So for things like that, that's why Regidrago V-Star, I feel like, has to be in that S tier slot. So now that's going to do it for today's video. Once again, if you enjoy the content I've been making for the channel, don't forget to leave a like, smash the subscribe button. I would appreciate it. And I'll see you all in the next one. Peace!